Welcome, chosen one. Let me ask you something before we begin. Have you ever been so close to giving up that you stopped explaining yourself to people who were never going to believe you anyway? Because heaven just noticed that. And what happens next is going to leave them speechless. You've been carrying something heavy. Not a weight you chose, but one they placed on your shoulders the moment they decided you were too quiet to fight back. They watched you absorb everything. The silence. The accusations. The rooms where your name became a punchline, and you stayed standing anyway. Not because you were weak, because you understood something they never will. That when you stop trying to convince people who are committed to misunderstanding you, heaven starts paying attention in ways they never expected. Here's what nobody told you. That silence they mocked you for, it wasn't surrender. It was strategy. And now the most unexpected thing just happened overnight. The scenario didn't just shift. It detonated, and every single person who placed a bet against you is about to find out exactly what divine timing looks like from the losing side. 1. Overnight, the person who once laughed loudest is now the most afraid. There was a season where they were comfortable dismissing you, comfortable repeating lies about you to anyone who would listen, comfortable building a version of you that had nothing to do with who you actually are. They laughed because they thought you were powerless. They went hard because they believed there would never be any real consequences. But something changed last night. You didn't do anything different. You didn't make a move. You didn't post anything. You didn't call anyone. And yet the entire dynamic just broke open. The person they never expected suddenly stepped in, not with a gentle word or a quiet comment, with authority, with receipts, with the kind of boldness that makes an entire room go still. They were brave because they thought no one was watching. Now someone is, and that someone cannot be bought, pressured, or manipulated into silence. The phone calls are happening right now. The panic texts are flying. The private group chats where your name was dragged are suddenly full of nervous backpedaling, not because they feel guilty, because they feel exposed, and the person doing the exposing isn't you. That's what makes it impossible to escape. 2. They called you isolated. What they didn't see was who heaven had already positioned. Isolation was their weapon. If you had no one in your corner, you could be controlled. You could be talked over. Your truth would echo in an empty room and eventually stop making sound. They counted on that. They built their confidence on the fact that you appeared to be standing alone. But what they couldn't see, what they never factored in, was the person already in place, not making noise, not showing their hand, watching, gathering, waiting for the moment when speaking up would do more than just make a statement, waiting for the moment when the truth would land with maximum force. That moment is right now, and this person didn't come to whisper. They came to overturn. Every circle where your reputation was quietly dismantled, they're walking into those circles with something your enemies never prepared for, the truth delivered without apology, by someone who has no reason to protect the people who hurt you. You don't need a crowd to be rescued. You need one voice that the room cannot ignore. That voice just activated. 3. They mistook your stillness for defeat. It was actually your greatest advantage. Every time they poked at you and got nothing back, they thought they were winning. Every time they lied and you didn't retaliate, they interpreted it as weakness. They didn't understand that a person who refuses to chase chaos isn't broken. They're building. They're letting the record write itself. They're allowing the contrast between their behavior and yours to grow so visible that eventually no one needs you to explain it. Your peace was never passive. It was evidence. Your consistency was always your testimony. The calmness they called weakness was actually the thing preserving your credibility for this exact moment. Because now that someone is speaking for you, they're not speaking into confusion. They're speaking into clarity. The contrast is already undeniable. And here's the part that cuts deepest for them. They cannot claim you provoked this. They cannot twist it into a victim narrative. They made their bed publicly, and publicly is exactly where the truth is about to be laid bare. 4. They told everyone you were lying. Someone just showed up with proof they never knew existed. This is the part that's going to rearrange everything. They were so confident that your truth had no legs. They spent time making sure people doubted you. They coached fake witnesses. They preemptively discredited you in spaces you didn't even know existed. They built such a thorough wall of deception that you started wondering if maybe you were the problem after all. You weren't. And now the proof of that is surfacing. Not through something you did. Not through a dramatic confrontation. Through someone who had access you never had. Someone who saw the inside of what was being done to you. Someone who stayed quiet until the moment staying quiet would mean becoming complicit. When the receipts hit the table, silence becomes its own kind of confession. And the people who called you a liar are very, very quiet right now. What they gathered to destroy you with is now the very thing being examined under new light. Every manipulated screenshot, every twisted message, every fake narrative they packaged so carefully, it's being unpacked now by someone who knows the original context. And under that light, the story isn't about you being unstable. It's about them being obsessed, calculated and deliberate in their cruelty. 5. Someone they looked up to just pointed at them and said, "You are the source of this." They had a fortress, a circle of people who validated everything they did, who nodded along, who passed the lies forward without question. And at the center of that fortress was someone they needed more than anyone else, someone whose opinion made them feel untouchable, someone they thought was permanently in their corner. That person just walked out of their corner and into yours, not dramatically, not with announcement, but with the quiet, devastating certainty of someone who finally saw through the performance and is done pretending they didn't. When that voice said, "The problem was never them," the fortress didn't just crack. It collapsed from the inside, because people who are only loyal out of social comfort can't survive that kind of shift. They need the current to keep flowing in one direction. The moment that current reverses, they scramble to relocate themselves before they're swept away. The same people who applauded your destruction are now quietly looking for the exit, not because they've changed, because they've been seen. 6. Your name is being defended in rooms you were never invited into, and it is winning. They built private spaces specifically to exclude you, rooms where your character could be discussed without your presence, where the narrative could be shaped without interruption. They thought exclusion was protection. They thought if you never heard what was said, you couldn't counter it. What they forgot is that God doesn't need you in the room to defend you inside of it. He just needs one person who was already there to stop going along with the script. One person who'd seen enough. One person willing to say, "That's not who they are," and you know it. That person has now become the most disruptive presence in every space where your name was kept small, not by yelling, by remembering, by saying out loud what others whispered in agreement but never dared to speak. And the rooms where your reputation was burned are now the rooms where your vindication is on record. 7. The ones who watched without speaking are now switching sides. Watch how they do it. Let's be honest about something uncomfortable. The most painful part wasn't the ones who attacked you. It was the ones who watched, who knew, who privately agreed with you in moments of honesty, but chose their social position over your dignity. They said nothing because it cost them nothing. They stayed out of it because the storm wasn't hitting their house. Now that something powerful has stepped in on your behalf, they are moving. You'll see it happen in layers. First, they go quiet on the side that hurt you. Then they start leaving small affirmations in your direction. Then eventually they show up pretending they were always rooting for you. Recognize this for what it is. It is not loyalty. It is not growth. It is survival. They are managing their proximity to what's coming, and they are doing it for themselves, not for you. You are not required to welcome them. You can acknowledge the shift without opening the door. Forgiveness does not mean reinstating access. The people who stayed silent when it cost them something do not automatically earn a seat at the table now that it costs them nothing. 8. God waited until they were certain they had won. That was the plan all along. If this had unfolded earlier, they would have been able to spin it. They would have had enough social capital remaining to pivot, enough credibility to muddy the waters, enough allies still committed enough to run interference. Heaven let them get comfortable. Heaven let them get loud. Heaven let them build their narrative so high that when it came down, there would be no question about what it was. Timing in the spirit doesn't work the way we want it to. It works for maximum impact. The exposure wasn't released when you needed comfort. It was released when it would do the most damage to the deception and the least damage to the truth. And that moment is now. They were at their most confident, their most visible, their most protected by social consensus. And the truth hit them exactly there. Everyone who cheered for them had to watch. Everyone who repeated their lies had to reckon with what they passed along. The revelation wasn't just for your benefit. It was a public record that what they built was built on sand. And everyone who helped pour the foundation is now standing in what's left of it. 9. You were never the weak one. You were the one they couldn't actually break. They tried every tool they had. Rumors, exclusion, public embarrassment, quiet campaigns to discredit you before you could even open your mouth, manufactured witnesses, reframed timelines. And through all of it, you stayed. Not perfectly, not without pain, but you stayed. You didn't dissolve. You didn't become what they needed you to become in order to justify what they were doing to you. That is extraordinary. Those people, under that kind of sustained pressure, either collapse or retaliate in ways that give their enemies the ammunition they were waiting for. You did neither. And what looked like passivity from the outside was actually the most disciplined kind of strength there is. The person now defending you isn't doing it because you begged. They're doing it because watching you endure with grace made it impossible to stay quiet any longer. Your character became its own kind of argument. You were never the liability they tried to make you. You were the one they could never actually get to, and now the person standing up for you is pointing that out to every room that bought the lie. 10. The one defending you isn't just speaking. They are dismantling everything built to bury you. This is not a quiet gesture. This is not a symbolic show of support. The person in your corner right now is operating with precision. They are not engaging in drama. They are confronting structures. They are pulling at threads that connect all the way back to the origin of what was done to you. They understand the full scope of it, not just the surface incidents, but the patterns, the deliberate choices, the calculated moves that were made over time. And they are not afraid. They don't need to protect a relationship with the people who hurt you. They have no debt to those people's opinions, which makes them the most dangerous thing that could have walked into this situation. Someone with nothing to lose and everything to say. The networks that held your enemies up are quietly coming apart. The alliances that felt permanent are showing their fault lines. The doors that once shut in your face are opening from the inside, not because you forced them, because the person who holds the keys decided it was time. 11. For the first time, they are being seen by someone they cannot manipulate. Their greatest skill was always the ability to reframe the story before the other person could, to make themselves the victim, to perform remorse just long enough to reset the cycle, to cry the right tears in front of the right people. They had it choreographed. They knew which buttons to press, which vulnerabilities to play to, which version of events made them look best. None of that is working right now. Because the person looking at them is not emotionally accessible to the performance. They've already seen the full context. They already know the behavior patterns. They know what the tears mean. They know what the sincere apologies are for, and they are not moved. Being seen by someone who won't be charmed is the most uncomfortable experience for someone who has built their entire survival strategy on charm. They are staring into a mirror they cannot smash, held by someone they cannot reach. Every mask they wear is being catalogued. Every inconsistency is being noted. And for the first time in perhaps years, they are experiencing the specific terror of having no exit. 12. Everything they gathered to use against you is now being used to define them. They were meticulous, they tracked, they collected. They made sure they had something ready for every scenario in which the truth might surface. They thought they had covered every angle. But the thing about weapons you build in secret is that they carry your fingerprints. And when a skilled, credible, unafraid person picks them up and examines them, those fingerprints tell a story you cannot walk back. The screenshots they manipulated are being reviewed with context. The messages they took out of order are being reassembled correctly. The witnesses they coached are being cross-referenced with the actual timeline. And none of it holds the way they thought it would once someone who knows what to look for starts looking. What was supposed to be your destruction has become their profile. Not a victim's profile, an aggressor's, not someone reacting to chaos, someone creating it deliberately over time, and the people who were handed that profile and believed it are now seeing the original document, and the realization is landing in waves. 13. Your pain was never the end of the story. It was always the beginning of the reckoning. Heaven does not waste suffering, not the kind you endured, not the kind that went unseen, unacknowledged, unpaid for. Every moment you sat with what was done to you and chose not to become it, you were building something they could not touch, a testimony that required no amplification because the weight of it was already undeniable to anyone willing to examine it honestly. And now someone is examining it honestly and publicly, and with the reach to make it permanent. Your story is not being whispered anymore. It is being spoken in the language of authority and fact, in spaces where the people who hurt you cannot redirect the conversation. This was never just about you being vindicated. This was about heaven using your endurance as a testimony that changes the room permanently. You are no longer just a person who survived something. You are the evidence of what happens when someone refuses to become their wound. The person defending you understands that. They are not speaking on your behalf out of pity. They are speaking because your story is the kind of truth that does not stay quiet forever, and its moment has come. 14. This was never coincidence. This was divine order moving in on a case that was already decided. What you are watching unfold is not luck. It is not a happy accident of timing. It is the activated consequence of a verdict that was handed down somewhere far above the level of human drama. Heaven saw the record, heaven reviewed the evidence, and heaven issued a ruling. What you are experiencing right now, the shift, the defender, the exposure, the silence of people who were once so loud, is the execution of that ruling. They cannot outrun it. They cannot lobby their way out of it. They cannot gaslight heaven. Every system they relied on to stay protected is coming apart by design, not by accident. Every cover that kept their behavior invisible is being removed according to a schedule they have no access to and no control over. And you, the chosen one who endured, who did not collapse, who kept your integrity in the middle of a sustained assault on your character, you are now standing on the other side of something that was always going to break in your direction. Not because you were perfect, because you were faithful. Because you chose truth even when truth seemed to be losing. That faithfulness had a consequence, and you are watching it unfold right now. Don't minimize what's happening. Don't question whether you deserve it. Don't shrink back from the space that's being cleared for you. Stand in it. Let your vindication be visible. Let the restoration be public. Because the same people who watched you be torn down in public need to see what heaven does for those who refuse to abandon their integrity. The scenario didn't just flip. It was corrected. And this is only the beginning of what that correction produces. You were chosen for this moment, not because it would be easy, but because you were exactly the right person to survive it, and